Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Li Jiang.
Good morning. That was a wonderful panel session, and we have something special coming up right after. So for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Li Jiang. I work at GSV with the wonderful team that co-hosts this conference. But you all didn't come to see me, you came to see Jeremy Bailenson. So Professor Jeremy Bailenson studies the psychology of virtual reality, and he's the founding director of Stanford University's Virtual Human Interaction Lab. I think in layman's terms, that means that he is basically the person that you have to talk to about virtual reality and augmented reality. So we're very excited to have him. In addition to teaching at Stanford, Jeremy studies the effects of VR and how it can transform education, environmental conservation, empathy, and health. He has published over 100 papers on communication, computer science, education, environmental science, law, marketing, medicine, political science, and psychology. And he consults pro bono on VR for US government agencies, and his first book was quoted by the US Supreme Court, although he has yet to speak at ASU GSV Summit until today. He is an educator, a scientist, an author, a visionary. He is Jeremy Bailenson. Please welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Lee, for that lovely introduction. And I want to thank GSV and Arizona State University for throwing what's just an amazing conference. The conversations I've had over the last day have just been special, and this lineup of speakers it's truly amazing. So it's a privilege for me to be here. My background, my PhD is in psychology. In 1999, my degree was in using VR to model the human mind. I then left that field of cognitive science and went and did a postdoc where I learned how to build the hardware and do the programming to build immersive virtual reality, and then to run experiments to figure out how the brain functions on VR. So for 20 years, I've been building immersive virtual reality and testing to see the effects on the mind and testing to see which applications work. For the next 25 minutes, we're going to talk about the technology, how it works, why now is a very special moment. We're then going to talk about research findings from my academic lab focused on education, how experience in VR can change the way you think and behave later on, and we're going to conclude by showing how those academic studies that began in the lab actually became products that people and governments and companies are using now. Raise your hand. How many of you guys have been in virtual reality? Raise them high. About 30 of you. How many of you guys have walked in virtual reality, not just looked? Okay, very good. I brought VR for you today. After this talk, if you go to the Tomorrowland exhibit, we brought a high-end, full room scale tracking VR where you will get to test out some of the things that I brought today. So for those of you that haven't tried it, I want you to watch this video and to tell me, excuse me. So this person, he is about, oh, there we go, you are watching the video. Tell me what you think this person is doing. Call it out, please.
Walking on the plank.
He is walking the plank. So I want to show you that again. Let's do that again. The room that he's in looks just like the physical room. It's a 3D model. What we've done, though, is we've dropped a chasm. Okay, a 10-meter drop, and we put a little rickety plank, and he's got to walk across this plank to get to the other side. If you've seen Roadrunner or Wile E. Coyote, the cartoon, it's just like that. I want to go back in time. In 2001, I dragged all of my hardware, put it on a plane, went to Washington, D.C., did a demonstration for a conference for federal judges and lawyers. We were talking about courtroom applications of VR, how you could use it, for example, to recreate crime scenes or to do witness testimony inside VR. And we gave a demo of the pit to an elderly man. He was probably in his late 60s. He was a federal judge, a large man, and as he was walking over the plank to try to get to the other side, he just took a little bit of a step off to the side. We modeled gravity, and he fell down. Now, if you're in the physical world and you wanted to save your life, what would you do? You would dive at a 45-degree angle and try to catch the other side of the lip. So here we are in DC with all these lawyers and judges, and this gentleman from out of nowhere dove physically, okay? It gets worse because it was my first public demo, and there was a sharp corner of a table where my computer was, and his face was going right towards it. So I had one move. I dove at him, redirected his trajectory. He was okay. Nobody got sued. I didn't end up in jail. He was a good sport about it, actually. But the point of this story is to illustrate psychological presence. When VR is done well, the brain treats it as if it were real. It's not a media experience. It's like you're doing something. So if you can take one point from this talk, as you think about virtual reality in education and your other applications, think of it as an actual experience, not as a media experience. In March 2014, we host a lot of visitors to the lab. In March 2014, we brought Mark Zuckerberg to the lab. He spent about 2.5 hours doing demos, some of which you'll get to do later today, and then talking about the applications that we'll talk about today: communication, entertainment, more importantly, empathy, and issues of poverty and conservation. Zuck comes 2 weeks later. He buys this tiny little company that no one has ever heard of called Oculus, spends what we now know is $3 billion on Oculus. The day after that happens, the New York Times runs a front page article in the business section saying the visit to Bailenson's lab was in part responsible for Zuck buying Oculus. And since then, even though I'm a professor, which is what I do most of the time, it's been important to me to engage with these companies all these companies are ones I spend substantial amounts of time with. All of them, I promise you, have 8 or 9 figure budgets about virtual reality. So this is the time for you guys to start thinking about how to incorporate the tech. To give you a sense, the helmets that I was using, again, I've been doing this since the late 1990s. It used to be the helmets that we put you in, the ones on your right side, cost more than my car. The ones that we're using now in the lab are twice as good, but they cost less than the price of a dinner. So we're really at a tipping point here, and we are now starting to see large events where entire classes can see this at scale. This is in Barcelona last year, where thousands of people are inside of virtual reality. But where I add value to you guys today is not to talk about the hardware. This is my grandfather. He's 91 years old, and when I finally got him into VR, he kind of looked around and he said, well, what am I supposed to do in here? And for those of you that raised your hand about VR, if I'm going to predict that your response was, this is pretty cool, and it's a neat technology, but I'm really not sure how I would use it tomorrow. It's a cool thing, but it's not jumping to me what I would do tomorrow. What we're going to spend the rest of today talking about are applications that are ready to use tomorrow. To be clear, I do not believe VR is an every minute thing. If 3 years from now, 4 years from now, you guys are using VR to check your email, then I believe as a field we have failed miserably. VR is not free. It's distracting. People are going to walk into walls, step on cats, get mugged in the subways because they can't see anything. It's arguably addictive when you think about the best party you've ever been to. If every social media event feels that way, or gambling feels like you're in Las Vegas, or pornography feels like sex, these intense experiences will become addictive. It's fatiguing for the visual system. In my lab, we have a 20-minute rule. So we can go on and on about the costs of VR, but just to be clear, I don't think you should use it for everything. We are going to talk today about reserving this intense experience that the brain treats as real for very special experiences, one that are impossible to do in the real world, one that are so expensive and rare you can't do it easily, ones that would be counterproductive to do in the real world, meaning it's an experience that adds value to your psychological life, but you wouldn't want to do it physically. And finally, ones that are dangerous. VR gets its history from flight simulators. Why do we have flight simulators? Because you should be able to learn by doing. You should be able to learn when mistakes are free, and that's the model of the flight simulators that was raised in the late 1920s. So to sum up this guideline, don't use VR for everything. Save it for the things that are special. The first example is going to be teaching diversity and empathy. In the year 2003, my lab was first funded by a company named Cisco, and a brilliant woman named Marcia Satowski. She said, Jeremy, can you use VR to do a better way to teach tolerance, diversity, and other things of that nature. And I said, let's build the virtual mirror. Okay? So the virtual mirror, what's going to happen in this video, we're going to induce what's called body transfer. Body transfer, a famous paper published in 2007 in the journal Science. If you move your physical body around and your avatar's mirror image moves with you in synchrony, meaning when you move your right arm, the mirror image moves its right arm, after about 4 minutes, the part of the brain that has a self schema incorporates that mirror image into the self, meaning you truly believe that is you in the mirror and you when you look down first person. This research leverages something called the contact hypothesis, a sociological theory, to simplify it, which says if you take two different groups and you put them together, they're going to learn to get along. I wanted to take that a step further. What if instead of being around someone else, you literally became them? So watch this movie, please. He's walking around in the physical world. This is a 2003 quality VR video, so excuse the graphics. Walks up to a virtual mirror, and he's a white male. He goes to the mirror. I sped it up. He spends about 4 minutes doing body transfer in reality, but we're going to give you a few seconds. He bends down the knee, comes back up. I hit a button. He's now a woman of color. Okay? The next step in this is he turns around, and I'm not going to show that in this video. He turns around, we network in a second person into virtual reality. So he looks down, he still is a woman of color. We bring in a second person, and that person proceeds to say horrible things and do horrible things about that person's race and gender. So the sequence is become someone else, feel like you're wearing their body, and then experience prejudice firsthand. In my lab, since 2003, we've been publishing papers that demonstrate this treatment, becoming someone else, experiencing trauma firsthand, causes more change in behavior and attitudes than role-playing, than watching videos, than reading case studies. I've been publishing this in academic journals for over a decade. It works. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the National Basketball Association, he came to my lab in 2015. He came because he wanted to think about VR as entertainment, but after a 3-hour session where we really talked about the applications that we're discussing today, Adam Silver walked out of there, and Eric Hutcherson, the head of HR for the NBA, really believing that the Home Run app was not watching basketball games in VR, but helping people really understand the plight of others. And then after that, a few months later, Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the National Football League, he came to the lab. To his credit, he and Troy Vincent, the VP of Operations, who's a really forward-thinking gentleman, because they wanted to think about, can we use the National Football League as a beacon to think about a better way to train diversity? And I'm very proud to announce that as of this National Football League Combine about 8 weeks ago, we debuted a diversity simulation trainer where people get to interview others and they get to practice different genders, different ages, different races, and they get to go in VR and conduct these interviews and to really try to get better at doing the mistakes that all of us make when we engage into social interactions. Remember the flight simulator, you should be able to make mistakes and learn how to be better when you don't have to hurt someone by being wrong. Next line of research is about altruism and helping behavior. So it turns out that there is a vast literature, not from my lab, hundreds of studies from around the world that show if you play these really intense, violent video games for hours and hours a day, you will be more aggressive in the physical world. We model media experiences. But what if you wanted to do the opposite? Give someone a really intense experience, but instead of killing somebody or killing 100 people in an hour, you're saving a life. Will that experience transfer the same way that we know the aggressive ones do? And so here is a demo where people become a superhero.
There has been an earthquake warning and the city has been evacuated. A child has been unaccounted for and the parents have informed authorities that their child is diabetic and will go into shock without insulin. You have a vial of insulin in your pocket. Your task is to fly through the city to find the child and deliver the insulin, saving the child's life. As soon as you see the child, call out. You must indicate to the experimenter that you found the child, so please clearly announce that you see the child when the child comes into view. You may now begin your search. Lift your arms above your head to take off from the ground.
Very intense experience. The floor is shaking, wind coming at them, tracking his every movement. The astronauts from NASA say this is the closest they've ever been to space walking on Earth when they come here. Really intense. People sweat.
Thankfully, you've reached the child before diabetic shock set in. You hand the syringe to the child who injects the insulin. You have now completed your task and saved the child's life.
So people get really excited by this task. They get really excited by it. And when they save the child's life, they feel good. What we then do is we borrow a paradigm from social psychology. We have an actress fake an accident. We videotape everyone, and we look to see how helpful they are. When you become a hero, have a superpower, save a life, everybody helps. The control condition, you ride passively in a helicopter and maybe tour the city. A lot of people don't help. On average, they help more slowly and less thoroughly. So that may sound kind of hokey to you guys, that becoming a hero in VR makes you nicer in the physical world. But if you believe the hundreds and hundreds of studies that show the opposite, which is we model violent media, you should believe that if we build good stuff, they'll follow that too. The next line of work is about conservation. So one of my heroes is Dr. Jane Lubchenco. She was the head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration under President Obama for 4 years. In that 4-year window, there were more natural disasters than any other 4-year window in US history. Scientists, in consensus, climate change is causing these disasters, but a major portion of lawmakers and people in the population still do not buy that the climate change is causing these changes. This quote from her, when people directly experience something, they see it in a different light, comes from Dr. Lubchenco. Her story is that when she goes to visit these cities that have been devastated by flood or other natural disasters, the people there, it doesn't matter what their politics were, they now understand, because they have a direct experience, how intense climate change is. And there's a great quote that she has from a lawmaker who says, literally, "I have seen the light." That's a direct quote. After an intense experience, he said, "I've seen the light." He now understands climate change. In VR, natural disaster is free. One of our more famous studies in this area involves cutting down trees. So it turns out that soft, fluffy toilet paper that we all love, it comes from non-recycled pulp. 50% of the pulp comes from second growth forests. 10% of the pulp for that soft, fluffy toilet paper comes from virgin trees. This article comes out that describes this process in 2009 in the New York Times. A woman named Leslie Kaufman. I live in the hippiest place on the planet in the Bay Area, California. And many stores do not carry recycled toilet paper. The ones that do, you've got to hunt and peck to find it. So how do you get people to change behavior? Why are we continuing to deforest for arguably a not essential task? We brought subjects to the lab, gave everybody those statistics, and had 3 groups of subjects. One group read a beautifully written narrative, would we like to cut down a tree? The second group saw a video shot from the shoulder of a lumberjack. And the third group put on the helmet, had a haptic device that shook their hand like a chainsaw, had to move their arms. We call this embodied cognition. It's really important to get the body involved. The tree crashed down, the floor shakes in my lab, the floor bounces up and down. Really intense experience. When you come to this experience, people will come in and they'll go shopping, and I'll get a phone call 3 months later. "Jeremy, I went down the toilet paper aisle at the supermarket and I thought of you." And I'm delighted to do that. I'm delighted to be thought of in that nature. But we never trust what people say. In our experiment, when you ask them pre and post, everyone says they're going to use less paper just by the stats that I just gave you. But as you all know, it's really hard to change conservation behavior. It's hard. It's hard to carpool. It's hard to sort your garbage. It's hard to go back inside and turn out your lights. In our studies, we follow them in the physical world, and the study is replicated. When you cut down the tree, use 20% less paper than the other 2 conditions, 20%. This study is also replicated in another city. Now, if I were to teach you conservation about deforestation by forcing you to go and cut down trees, that would be a really bad way to teach the lesson. In VR, you get the best of both worlds. It feels real, but nobody's harmed. What I brought to show you here today is something I'm extremely proud of. In a 3-year process for a grant funded by the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation with my colleague Roy P., an educational technologist, and Theo McKelly, a brilliant marine scientist, we have built a 7-minute field trip to learn about ocean acidification. How many of you guys have heard of ocean acidification? So in a room of very smart people, less than a third of you. That's okay. I didn't know it earlier before I met Theo. It turns out when humans produce CO2, a third of that gets absorbed by the ocean. When ocean absorbs CO2, a chemical reaction we all learned about in 7th grade happens. The water becomes more acidic. The pH level goes down the same way that when you add bubbles to water to make seltzer, it's a little acidic. When the water gets more acidic, we have a disaster for all of humanity because the coral reefs will die, the fish will die, we won't have food by the year 2100. How do we know this? My colleague Theo McKelly has discovered and researches this very special reef in the Mediterranean where there are underwater vents that cause the water to become more acidic and basically simulate how all the world's oceans will look by the year 2100. So we spent years, thousands of hours to produce a field trip. So one of my roles at Stanford, I work with the provost to figure out, to rethink what we mean by online learning. I don't want to replace the classroom. I want to add field trips. I want the best field trip that you have ever been on in your entire life. I want it so that every single person with a $20 helmet can experience that. So I brought this for you to do today in the other room. It's a 7-minute journey. We have brought this to the US Senate to show senators. We've put this in high schools. We put it in colleges. But what I'm most proud of is as of a month or two ago, we put this online for free on something called Steam, which is the iTunes of VR. So anyone with a helmet can now download this for free. I want to build a lot more of these field trips. Developmental research. A lot of questions I get is about, well, can kids do this? And the big tech companies, they call me to ask me what I think their age ranges should be, and I'm very careful not to give them an answer there. My PhD student, Jackie Bailey, is about to publish what is likely to be the canonical study on the developmental issues with kids. There's been very few studies that look at children and how they use VR. I'll show you this video here just to give a sense of the reaction from a child.
I'll have him do a couple things for us, okay? Ready? Oh, hello there! It's Design, your lovable furry friend Grover. Hi. Get up out of your chair and dance with us. Follow our crazy moves. You can do it. Okay. All right.
So this is Jackie Bailey's dissertation. It's funded by Sesame Street, a Sesame Workshop. And the good news is she's showing that nobody gets hurt. Kids come in for 5 minutes with their parents. It's a large sample of 5-year-olds. That's Sesame's demographic. And the kids are fine. On the not so good news, as you can see by that child's reaction, the content delivered via VR is really persuasive. They comply. When Grover asks you to dance in VR, you dance. When Grover asks you to dance on TV, not so much. So I won't go into too much detail on that study, but I want to assure this room that my lab and others are starting to look at this issue with kids in VR. And we have no real answers for it yet, but we are examining it. In the last few minutes, I want to focus on training. I know that a lot of us care about STEM education, but in my opinion, and I've been studying VR for 20 years, the first real success of VR in terms of people out using it in the world, arguably the first B2B success in the history of VR, depending on how you count it, is my former grad student Derek Belch's company called Striver. So Derek was the field goal kicker for the Stanford team in 2005. After my virtual people class, which he took, he said, Jeremy, can we use VR to train athletes? I said, Derek, it's a brilliant idea, but the tech is not ready yet. Come back in a decade and we'll build it. He did. He came back in 2014, got his master's degree in my lab while he was an assistant coach on the Stanford football team. And what we built was quarterback trainer. It started as a quarterback trainer. It now trains everybody. But it was just about putting a quarterback on the line of scrimmage. He has about half of a second to read the defense, recognize the defense, and decide if he's going to change the play. He gets extra mental repetitions and just gets to, in addition to his physical practice, have hours, if he wants it, per week of extra mental practice where he gets to just repeat until he's perfect. After 3 weeks, Coach Shaw saw it was working so well that he made it mandatory for all of the QBs and all of the running backs to train, who have to make those decisions. Kevin Hogan, the quarterback in 2014, says that the best games of his season, I would never take credit for this, but he says the best games of his season and career at that point were after he used this product to really get better and really feel comfortable in the pocket. So Derek graduates January 2nd, 2015, and he forms a company called Striver. Striver is changing the way athletes train in just about every sport there is. This is Carson Palmer for the Arizona Cardinals. He's actually got a system in his house. He uses it for just a couple minutes a day. That's all he needs. These are some of the teams that Derek is training with. These are not all the teams because a lot of teams don't want to give away their competitive advantage. But what I can say, because I help him in this process, this is the first time I've ever seen people using VR, not just for a kind of a gimmick or not just for something that you do every once in a while. They're getting better because they use it. Now, Derek, his company took funding from a venture capital firm about 6 months ago, and what's happened since is because when you take money, you've got to get massive. We're learning that all the lessons that we use to train football players, put someone in an intense scene, have them scan a room, make a decision quickly. It works for the employee in a large retailer on Black Friday. It works for the person at the deli counter who's got to see if there's a safety issue. And we're now working with a number of companies, including one of the largest retailers in the world, to transform the way they train employees. Everything we discussed in terms of making quarterbacks better, you get the same effect for just about any job that requires training that you want to be consistent, training that you want to feel really intense as opposed to reading a workbook or watching skits. And what we're seeing from the clients that are using this is it's a really good use case for the technology. I will close on the future of communication. So I met a bunch of you last night. I'm going to be here giving VR demos for the next 4 or 5 hours. It's awesome to meet you. I love it. However, we cannot continue to grow on this planet 9 billion, 10 billion, 11 billion, and continue to fly and commute the way that we do. For 20 years, I've been building technology and testing the efficacy of technology that really tests what I call the virtual handshake. I mean, I want to feel like I know you. I want eye contact to work. I want my body posture to work. As you all know, if I were Skyping into this talk, it wouldn't be as good. There's something about this physical presence. I look at you, you're a fantastic audience. You are engaged. I feel present with you, and you feel present with me. If it was Skype, if it were a video conference, it wouldn't work. I'm trying to find the best of both worlds. I'm trying to find the level of fidelity of an avatar in communication that can make it so that I don't fly. 3 weeks ago, I flew 28 hours to go to Sarawak in Borneo to talk to the government about how to incorporate VR into their economy. I gave an hour-long talk and then flew back 30 hours with the wind. I want that to stop. I want to look back on my father who commutes every single day from Peekskill to the Bronx, an hour and 15 minutes each way. When you watch a movie from the 1970s and you see somebody, a doctor, smoking cigarettes over a patient's open heart cavity, you say, can you believe they did that? I want us to say that about the commute. Can you believe that people got in these boxes and followed each other in these boxes so they could sit down at a cube and type all day and then get back in that box? I don't want to eliminate travel. We should travel when we want to, but not when we have to. And I'm delighted to say the Department of Energy has just announced a large funding initiative to have folks like me and my colleagues build systems to replace travel. And one of our other speakers here, Adam Ghazali, I don't know if he's around, he and I are collaborating on a project to do that. So a lot of exciting stuff. I'm here all day. I'm not a VR evangelist. I don't play video games. I don't do social media. I'm not pushing this tech on you. I'm really honest when it doesn't work. So come find me, ask me if the VR solution that you have in mind is good for you, and I'm really findable over email. So thank you very much. I look forward to meeting you later on.